Well, good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to Politics and Prose. I'm Brad Graham, the co-owner of the bookstore, along with my wife, Lissa Muscatine. And we are delighted to be hosting Susan Cheever, who's here to talk about her very illuminating new book, When All the Men Wore Hats. Susan Cheever on the stories of John Cheever. This is Susan's 17th book. Her works have spanned various genres, memoir, biography, fiction, as well as nonfiction books about American history and alcoholism. She's written about her dad before, most notably in Home Before Dark, which was published in 1984, 2 years after John Cheever's death, and drew on his private journals, which themselves were later published in abridged form in 1991. The portrait that emerged of him then was of someone who lived a double life, a married man in the suburbs with 3 kids, but having secret sexual relationships with men as well as other women, and battling alcoholism for much of his life. In a prefatory note to the new book, Susan calls it a sequel of sorts, though she points out that the earlier book was about her father's life, while the new volume is more about his work. She probes deeper this time, examining her relationship with her father and deftly describing how his work was anchored in their family's daily life, with family members serving as inspiration for his characters. Though John Cheever was a prolific writer, he published scores of stories in the New Yorker from 1935 on, plus 3 mid-career novels. His family was burdened by financial worries until the success of his novel Falconer in 1997, and his collection the following year, The Stories of John Cheever, which won the Pulitzer Prize for fiction. His writing helped define the American short story, influenced generations of writers, and as Susan notes in her book, been televised, dramatized, and paid homage to in poems, songs, and hundreds of pages of critical writing. In looking back at her father's work, Susan seeks to understand, in a broader sense, the source of creativity and the connections between art and life. A review in Kirkus called the book, quote, by turns affectionate and admiring, but also clear-sighted and unsparing, an eloquent and fully immersive portrait of a renowned author. And Publishers Weekly said Susan, quote, offers bittersweet grace to a man whose life was a kind of fiction and whose fiction drew mercilessly from his life. A conversation with Susan will be Molly Jong-Fast, who also is the daughter of a famous writer, Erica Jong. Earlier this year, Molly released a book about her complicated relationship with her mother titled How to Lose Your Mother. Molly is herself a contributing writer at the New York Times, a political analyst at what's, I think as of today, called MS Now, and host of the podcast Fast Politics with Molly Jong-Fast. So, ladies and gentlemen, please join me in welcoming Susan Cheever and Molly Jong-Fast. Susan? Yeah.
Oh, this is good.
Okay, don't move.
I'd like some ice cream.
Hi, everyone. How exciting is this? It's rare that I get to interview someone who has meant so much to me. I can't. All right, I'm going to introduce her, but I also want to embarrass her because we have that kind of relationship. Susan Cheever taught me writing. She was my graduate school teacher, but she was way more than that. She's been, I'm sorry. Okay, I'll make it short. I'll make it short
now.
She is one of the people who in my life who probably saved my life in a lot of different ways. Oh no, now I'm really in for it. Anyway, this book, I'm so excited to get to interview her here. I'm so excited to be at Politics and Prose, which is just my favorite bookstore, and to get to talk about this amazing book. So I think I'm going to ask you to do you want to read a little bit or no?
Oh, sure.
So I'm going to let Susan read just a tiny bit of the book, and then we'll just talk about the book, and then we'll just talk about politics. No, I'm just kidding. Unless you want to talk about politics.
No, I don't want to talk about politics.
Okay.
So I asked my daughter which paragraph of this book is the one I should read. And here's the one that she chose. But of course, I'm going to read slowly because I don't have my glasses. All right. So this is my daughter's message to you. Being the child of a famous writer is about being replaced. Your squalid bedroom usurped by an adoring graduate student. Your place in history taken by some neighbor's daughter or some needy reader or some attractive random fan. For years, I hated it when people wanted to tell me how much they loved my father or his work. I felt diminished by their enthusiasm. Now I understand what they mean a bit better. I take it as a desire to connect with me, with him, and especially with the person they were when they read his stories the first time. Because really, the stories are great. If I weren't already his daughter, I would think I was his daughter. If he hadn't been writing about me, I would think he was writing about me.
That's a good paragraph. Yeah. So let's start by talking about why you decided to write this book, because it's a really interesting book, and I'm going to it's both an incredible memoir, like beautifully written memoir, but it's also a book about writing and a book about how to write, and also a piece of literary criticism. I actually was thinking, and I was going to tell you this earlier on the train when we came up together, that I'm not an academic. This is the understatement of the year. But I was thinking that your book actually, you could teach an entire class with that book, and then the stories, and then you know the sort of literary tradition that it talks about. Like there's a fair amount of literary criticism in there too.
Well, that's what I hoped. And also, let me say, I was very inspired by George Saunders' book, A Swim in a Pond in the Rain, which is the book that he wrote right out of his Russian literature course at Syracuse. And I thought, I had been turning over in my mind the idea of writing a book about a book. And so when the George Saunders book came out, I was like, So I love the idea of writing literary criticism mixed with other things. And do you want me to tell how it came about? Or blah,
Yes,
blah, blah?
yes.
So when my mother died in I forget which year, 10 years ago, I inherited this much money. And I thought to myself, when I got the check, thank God I never have to write another book. I'm not kidding. And I thought, the worst part of writing a book is publishing a book. I find it so painful. And I thought, and I have figured out how to avoid publishing a book. You don't write it in the first place. I thought that was so funny. I told everybody. I was pretty happy with myself. And so I thought, that's it. I'll teach. I'll have this happy life, whatever's left of it, and I'm done. Because writing books is hard, as we've been talking. So time went on, and then friends of mine kept saying, let's have lunch, let's have coffee, sometimes let's have dinner. And it turned out that all these people wanted from me was to pick my brain about my father's short stories, because they were teaching the short stories at Yale, at Princeton, at Harvard, where I was not teaching anything, right? And so they would yak on and on about my father's, effect on the culture and his wonderful short stories. And then they would ask me questions. And as I answered their questions, I realized I knew a lot. And they were mostly talking about the Red Book, what we call the Red Book, which is the book of 61 short stories that came out in 1978 and won the Pulitzer and everything else that my father had published. And so, they would take me out, David Gates, over and over, take me out, pick my brain, and then go off to teach what I had told them at this fancy college wherever they taught. So eventually I said to myself, I should be teaching these stories, duh. But there was no one who was going to let me do that. Of course not. I barely went to college. So I finally got somebody, the then head of Bennington, of a little part of Bennington, to allow me to lecture on the short stories. And so I wrote a lecture about the short stories. And it was sort of interesting. I was surprised. And I also realized how much I wanted to talk about the impact of the short stories on our culture. I mean, Mad Men, for instance, is based on the short stories almost completely. There's a bunch of Seinfeld stuff. There's a new television series based on the short stories called Friends and Neighbors. There's a wonderful rock and roll song about finding the dead John Cheever, which is based on the short stories. In other words, I kept finding things that Raymond Carver wrote a sequel to one of the short stories. I can go on and on and on. Anyway, that was where I started with the lecture. And so I gave this lecture, which I didn't think was very good. And furthermore, it was scheduled for early Sunday morning. So everybody was really hungover. And there I am whacking on about American literature. And so, but it got me started. And then I sort of started extending it. I didn't want to write it. I didn't have any intention of writing it. And I wrote it anyway. And it took years also, because I wasn't working very fast, obviously, because I couldn't allow myself to know I was working at all. So that's how it came to be.
That's a great story. And also, the part of it that I appreciate the most as a fellow Nepo baby is that you actually had all this insight into the stories, having been a character in them and also having been a professor, but that no one would let you teach it.
Right.
Because that I really appreciate. That I sort of appreciate the most. But that everyone else knew you had this insight and was trying to get it, which I also find totally relatable in every which way.
Well, it is. I'm not sure why you guys are here, but one of the interesting things about this conversation is it is very weird to be written about in fiction or nonfiction, I'm sure, but fiction is our experience. Yeah. And to go to parties and have people say, oh, I thought that third boyfriend you had was really better than the fourth one. And, they don't know what they're talking about. And you know what they're talking about because you read The New Yorker, right? But, people in our neighborhood thought The New Yorker was like the National Geographic for the Cheever family. Yeah. And they would read The New Yorker and go, oh, I didn't know Mary Cheever didn't have a washer dryer. And, then they would go after her at a party. So it's a weird experience to find yourself the subject of art. Not bad, not good, weird.
Yeah. I think I really like that you don't put a value judgment on it, because I always thought it was bad, and also annoying. But then I met someone who interviewed me whose mother had written about her and her sister, and she thought it was hilarious. And they both found it to be just so funny that made me feel like I didn't really want to have a value judgment on it, even though it is quite weird to go somewhere and have people know things about you that are somebody else's fantasies about you.
It's weird. So now I'm going to tell a story.
Please.
So here's the weirdest story. So in about 1954, my father published a book of short stories called The Enormous Radio. And in this book of short stories, there was a story called The Hartleys. And both of my parents said to me, you're not really old enough to read this. And I was like, really? That's not what they usually say. So please don't read this book. So the minute they went out for dinner, I grabbed the book, hopped into their bed where I wasn't allowed, and started reading this story called The Hartleys. And it was a story. So I was 12 when this happened, maybe, or 13, don't even remember. It was a story about a ski trip we had gone on, a family ski trip, and I recognized we all went to Woodstock, Vermont, and we all skied on this hill called Suicide 6, which was serviced by a very creaky old rope tow that somebody had made from an old car engine. And, there were a lot of details that I remembered. And in the story, the little girl, whose name is Anne, big diff, right, was afraid of skiing, and the parents tried to help her, but she was afraid. And at the end of the story, the little girl is crushed to death in the ski tow. Right. So here I am, I'm 12 years old, I'm in my parents' bed reading the book they told me not to read, and now I know why they told me not to read it, right? So that was weird. And then what happened next was, then I said to my father pretty soon, I wasn't the bravest, but I was pretty brave. I said, how could you do that, right? How could you kill me in the ski tow at Suicide 6? What's the matter with you? And he said, well, I was so anxious about you on the ski slope. Now, usually when you attacked my father for using you in a story, he would say, you're reducing literature to gossip. That was
very
one
good
of his
line.
big lines. Or he would say, fiction is not crypto-autobiography. These were two lines he used over and over again. This time he didn't. He tried to explain that it was his anxiety that had caused him to crush me to death in the ski tow at Suicide 6, et cetera, et cetera. And I didn't really believe him. But then the good thing that happened is when I wrote my first novel, I used the same scene, and I had the father rescue the daughter. So my father liked that a lot. A lot. He really thought that was great. So then he wrote a story in New York Magazine about how now we could communicate through our fiction, which is pretty much what we did after that. But it's such a weird situation. And
yes.
he also killed all of us. He had my brother nailed to a church door.
Oof.
He killed my other brother from parental neglect. I mean, it wasn't just me that got crushed to death.
Well, that's something.
Yeah.
Right.
Exactly.
It's nice. It's nice to know that all the siblings were treated equally. When you, it's funny because I think about I want to talk for a minute about the sort of important cultural importance of those stories, because they are everywhere and they created a sort of shorthand for a kind of American experience. And what you write about really well is how much of that experience was not real. And so I'd love you to talk about that, because I think it's so, this sort of the Cheever fantasy that your father sort of acted out that was both true and not true.
I'm not sure what you mean, but I'll answer it anyway.
Well, it's good, because my theory is that it doesn't matter what you ask people and they just say what they want to say.
I think that's pretty right.
Say something about your dad. Go.
Well, I think what you're trying to get at, how's that, is there's a idea about what a Cheever story is, and of course it's not that what any more than anything ever is. But one of the things about my father that was so interesting to me looking back in so many ways is that, and I didn't know this when he was alive, is that he was an extremely randy gay man. He wasn't a little gay. He was gay. And he was gay at a time when you could be put in jail for life for being gay. So he was a man living in fear and creating an imaginary world in which he was a horseback riding aristocrat. If you ever saw him ride a horse, you would know. And with Labrador retrievers and the whole, he figured out how he thought it should look. But a lot of it, that whole structure, and we all lived it. In other words, both my parents and the three of us children and the dogs and whatever else was around pretended to be this kind of, one cell thick aristocratic family, when in fact something else completely different was actually what was going on. And I do think that helped the writing. When I look at my father's contemporaries, his stories are better than theirs often. Sorry, John Updike. And I think it's because he always felt on the outside. He always felt like a criminal. And indeed, he was a criminal, right? And I think that made a huge difference. It certainly made a huge difference in our lives. And I really have come to hate the word trauma, so I'm not going to use it. But it made a huge difference in our lives. And I think it made a huge difference in the work and what he was able to do and what he was able to feel. And his scenes, his heterosexual love scenes are glorious. And, obviously he was bisexual, but it's interesting how I think their gloriousness is partly because it was what he didn't have.
That was a much better answer than my question. So it worked out very well for both of us and for you guys especially. It's so interesting. I want to talk about lying because and writing and the intentionality. There's so much interesting mishigas when it comes to being, this sort of what is true, what isn't true, what is written about to be true. I wonder, I feel like, and what especially with memoir, like, what we sort of absorb, what happened, what really happened, what we saw happen. Like, do you get because I kind of go down the rabbit hole myself of like, did this happen? Did this not happen? Is it tainted by the way I saw it? All of those sort of nuances when it comes to truth.
Is there such a thing as truth?
Well, or what actually, the truth of what actually happened.
Well, I don't know the truth of what actually happened. I'm not even sure what that means. But I guess what I'm thinking is that, the New Yorker obviously was my father's major outlet, is that the right word, for most of his life. And you didn't want to get in a fight with him because he would win in the pages of the New Yorker, right, and you would look bad. And generally those fights that appeared in the pages of the New Yorker featured a very kind man who just had a slight drinking problem and a really bitchy wife or daughter. And so you didn't want to get in a fight with him because that you knew what would happen. But I think this whole business of what's a lie and what's the truth, I don't know. I guess when I was thinking about tonight, I was thinking that what I wanted to talk about was...
Oh, good. Tell me what you want.
What happens when you've got two generations of this.
Oh, so good.
When I read The Hartleys, the story where I get crushed to death, I thought to myself, among other things, I will never do this to my children. I thought to myself, whatever happens, I will never subject my children to this kind of dreadful pain and exposure. So needless to say, I immediately did it to my children. And in fact, for 10 years, I wrote a parenting column for Newsday every week. So you can imagine how my children were exposed. And my excuse was that I asked them first. Okay, so they were 5 and 12. And I said to them, do you guys mind if I write a parenting column for Newsday? And they were like, can we have more ice cream? Right? It was very, very ingenuous on my part. But they got smarter over the 10-year period when I was writing that column. And soon I had to pay them. And it ended up being really quite expensive because they realized they had me, right? And I paid them a lot. And sometimes they would say no. There were certain things, which I obviously can't mention, that I was told I could not use. So they had a little power, but I really think, it's hard not to write about what you know the best.
Well, that, I think, is the real problem, in a way, the real problem of being like we are, which is people who process the world.
But you haven't written about your children.
Not yet. But if things go, if this politics thing doesn't work out, I probably will end up doing it. There's only, I can only do about 4 things. This is in the book, too, right? There are the writers who can write... there's the Chekhovs versus the Tolstoys. Did I make that
right.
up?
No, you didn't make it up.
Is that wrong, though? Yes.
That's right.
It's right. Okay. So that there are writers who know everything and writers who know 3 things. And
she's talking about Isaiah Berlin.
Yeah.
The fox knows many things. Come on, guys.
Right. The fox knows many things. Right. I was telling my daughter about it and she said, "Oh, I know that essay." And I said,
right.
"Oh, okay." But I think this is sort of I never knew how to absorb the world any other way, which is the second generation writer thing. And I don't know if that's a function of my own inability to like be a real person, or if that's heredity. I mean, the idea that this is sort of how we do the world is through writing.
Well, that question, which gets asked a lot, certainly of me, maybe not of you, is you just inherited it, right? And if he had been my father, I would have inherited it too. And, one of the things that makes that so painful is he would have much preferred any other child. And that's pretty clear. So when people say to me, if he had been my father, I think, well, if we could work it out. But we never were able to. But I think that I used to really bristle when people said, it's genetic, you inherited it from your father, because actually it's incredibly hard work. And you don't inherit it from anybody. You sweat bullets. So that used to bother me, but it doesn't bother me so much anymore. And I also, I don't think writing is a hereditary talent, if I even said that correctly. But I did have a huge gift. It was an incredible privilege to grow up in a house where there was so much excitement about reading and so much excitement about words. Every Sunday night, we all had to get up and recite a poem. And, the way our family was constituted, my brother recited, in Winter I Get Up at Night, Robert Louis Stevenson, and my mother recited a Tennyson poem about dying. And my father and I got into a competition, right? So I memorized John Greenleaf Whittier's, poem about the Civil War, and he memorized Fern Hill, and then I memorized Evangeline, and then he memorized. And so, this way we were able to keep the spotlight on us, whichever one of us it was, for a long, long time on Sunday night. But to even grow up in a household where that was happening was incredible. And my father, he loved to read, obviously, and he would read something like The Count of Monte Cristo, and then he would hand it to me and say, read it. I need to talk about it. And, it was really exciting to be in a place where books were so exciting. And I think that it's not congenital, but I think I could never be a writer if I hadn't had that background.
Yeah, see, I feel like that's a little bit the difference between Erica Jong and John Cheever. Is like people are like, Erica Jong, a little bit. I mean, I love my mom, don't get me wrong, but I didn't get like the if I were Erica Jong. I mean, I get a little bit of it, but mostly I got a sort of, but I do think, I want you to talk about what happens in his career when he gets sober and how everything changes for him, because it's like as someone who is 28 years sober myself, it is just like the dream. It's basically, I think it's so important. I think it's so interesting.
Well, the trouble with it is it's such a great story that we're all going to leave here and get sober. In other words, what happened to him when he got sober, he had like this storybook thing. He had been, he started publishing in 1930. And by the 60s, things were not going that well. He was drinking hard, and he drank a lot, and everyone around him drank a lot, and the stories began to disintegrate in a weird way. It's not that they got bad. He was too smart for that. They got very experimental. And, it got worse and worse, and then he ended up teaching at Sing Sing prison for a while, which was kind of a joke. In the book, I tell the story about how he decided that the prisoners should learn to write the way he learned to write by reading the Harvard classics. So he had my brothers take 2 boxes of the Harvard classics to Sing Sing prison so that he could teach et cetera, et cetera. But he taught at Sing Sing for a while, and then he couldn't get sober. He had a million heart attacks like people do. We were always rushing him to the hospital, and the doctor was always saying, well, I don't know if he's going to last, that the same old alcoholic sad story. And then, miraculously, he went to teach, and how much of this is, just cut me off.
This is very interesting.
Anyway, he went
and
up
also,
to,
this is why everyone is here.
well, he went up to teach.
Stories. I mean,
Hear the stories. Okay,
yeah.
So he went up to teach at Boston, tried to kill himself a couple of times, the same old alcoholic story. And he came home, and the doctor, who was kind of an idiot, said, well, I think he needs help. This is in 1975, so it wasn't so obvious or common. And the doctor said, there's this place in New York I've heard of called Smithers. So I called Smithers, and my father had decided that he could never go to AA because he was too famous,
My
right?
mother also had the same thing, but okay.
And so I called Smithers and I said, are you affiliated with AA? And they said, absolutely not. And of course, they were totally affiliated with AA, right? And so we sent my father to this place where they made fun of his accent. They made him, wash the dishes. He had to share a room with 4 other people. There was a deli owner, a former deli owner. It was not his usual jam. They wouldn't let him bring any books. He was allowed 1 phone call a week. And he would call me. I was working at Newsweek. And he would call me and say, one of the things that was very charming about my father is that he liked to think he spoke Italian, which he did not. So he would call me at Newsweek and say, cara, non posso stare qui, right? And I would go, the next call is going to be from a Nodaldini's bar. I mean, I just had no idea. So I reserved him a bed at Silver Hill just in case I just didn't know what to think. But he did get sober at Smithers after those 28 days. And he came out of there, now I'm going to cry, he came out of there a completely different man. And not only was he completely different, but he won the Pulitzer Prize, he won the National Book Award, he won the National Book Critics Circle Award in pretty quick succession. He wrote a book based on incarceration, surprise, surprise, Faulkner, I think his best book. And it was at the top of the bestseller list for, 6 months, 8 months. So he got sober, and then all of a sudden he had a career, an amazing career, a more amazing career than he'd ever had before. So it made sobriety look very good. So I would say if you want to be a writer, first get sober. How does that work?
That's good. Well, and I think that this really dovetails to my next question, which is, why does everyone want to be a writer?
I don't know. They do? They like to read. Well,
but do you
Okay.
fair
enough.
Do you think it does feel like that being a writer is something that a lot of people want to do?
It does feel that way. Do you guys feel that way?
I love that story about your father getting sober. And one of the things that I think is so in the book is so interesting, but also so, I think, important to the story, is that you do actually get to help him in his career.
I do.
And will you talk about that? Because I think that's a really interesting.
Well, that was just delicious. But I also want to say about being a writer, the thing about, I teach writing. And the thing that I say to my students is the only difference between you and me is I work harder. And they don't want to hear that. But it's kind of true. And just one example is my father was writing what he thought was a novel called The Swimmer. And I happened to be in the house when he was up to it, and he wrote about 160 pages of this novel. And then one afternoon he realized it wasn't a novel. So he cut 150 pages of it, leaving a 10-page short story. Yeah. So my students don't do that. That's a 10% yield, guys.
Yeah.
10%. So, if you're willing to write in that way, I think, I don't want to guarantee your success, but you're on a different plane. And so you want me to tell the Newsweek story?
No, I actually want to engage in this story now.
Okay.
Because as someone who learned writing from you, well, no, you did teach me.
I did teach you.
At the Bennington low residency MFA program, where
I did teach you.
Yeah, I know.
I did.
So that where, and you did, and it is really true. Like I always feel like my worst quality when it comes to writing is that sometimes I fall in love with my worst sentences.
Sure.
Right?
Yeah. Because they seem to you like your best sentences.
That's right. I do feel like I have such bad judgment often about my own work. I'm kind of shocked.
Well, that's why, I just, in my syllabus, there are 5 ways to revise a piece, and that's like, A, B, C. That's, I don't want to brag, but I revise a lot, and
Yeah.
I need to. I mean, I say to my students, I'm only going to use this one more time. Watch when we're all writing from a prompt. My writing isn't any better than yours.
Right.
I just write 15 drafts. That's the difference. But wait, you had a question that
No, that was good. That was what.
I was going to answer the question.
Oh, I was
but
gonna.
I've forgotten
I
what
wanted
it
you to
was.
talk about. We're gonna go to question. We're gonna go to audience questions in a minute. So I hope you guys have prepared really, really spacey questions that make no sense that she can then not answer. I'm known for this. This is what I do for a living, sort of.
I know.
For a living. I would love you to sort of talk about helping your dad, because that's a great story.
Yeah. And I also...
Unless you have something else you want to say, which also
I think it's
want.
very interesting to talk about writing, but of course I do.
Well, we could talk
So
about writing.
a nice thing happened. Many nice things happened. But one of the nice things that happened is that, and it's part of this storybook sobriety nice thing. So he gets sober. I'm working at Newsweek, and we put him on the cover. And the two guys who are my editors at Newsweek say to me, we're putting him on the cover. And here's why they put him on the cover. Your employer. First, I went to the New York Times and said, would you be interested in a story about my father? And they were like, yes. So then I went to Ed Kozner at Newsweek and said, the New York Times wants me to write a piece for the book review. Right. So pretty soon he was on the cover. And then they wanted me to interview him. So I said, okay. So I drove out to the house, and this was about Falconer, which is this book, which is a passionate homosexual love affair, among other things. And so I drove out to the house, and we talked, and I said to him, I have to ask, have you ever had a homosexual love affair? Because that's the subject of this book. And he said, I've had many. And then he saw my face, or my mother dropped something, and then because I had no idea. And then he said, all between the ages of 9 and 12. And so he kind of made a joke out of it, but what a moment, And I have to say, I want to talk about this for one more minute.
Please.
What he went through because of the way this country was about any kind of sexual fluidity makes me so sad. And I mean, if he was alive now, it would be so completely different. And the fear that he had to deal with, the doubt that he had to deal with, it really, really makes me sad. And what makes me even sadder is that I could not have been worse when it came to helping him. For instance, here's just one of many horrible stories. So finally, he went to a psychiatrist, right? Our doctor is like, you gotta deal with these problems, John. So he goes to the psychiatrist, and he tells the psychiatrist that he's gay. And the psychiatrist is like, that's ridiculous. John Cheever couldn't possibly be gay. He has 3 children, blah, 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 Labrador retrievers, blah, blah, blah. And so the psychiatrist calls our family doctor and says, you'll never guess what I just heard. And the family doctor says, what? And the psychiatrist says, John Cheever was in here saying he's gay. And the family doctor was, that's ridiculous. The man takes nothing seriously. This is a disgrace. We've got to tell him that if there's no point in going to a psychiatrist unless you take it seriously. And so then the doctor called me and said, guess what your father's done now, right? And I said, what? And he said, he's told the psychiatrist he's gay, right? And I said, this is just the end, racing him to the hospital, et cetera, et cetera. So I called my father. And I said, what is the matter with you? You cannot go tell the psychiatrist that you're gay. I said to him, my gay father, I said, you have to take this seriously or it's not going to work. You can't be lying to everybody just because And I mean, that's pretty painful. Not only did I not know, not guess, but I didn't help. And when he reached out for help, I wasn't there.
I mean, I don't think it's so bad, but I mean, I've done worse
That's
to a
why we're
famous
friends.
parent. Yes, but I'm not going to tell you here. Well, no, I mean, I don't know. I mean, I've definitely, I don't. How would you have known? I don't. I mean, we're not psychics, and
no, but I think I could have just been a little more laid back.
I mean, I'm sure he was on some level relieved that everybody thought it was not true.
Well, yeah, but I don't know. I feel as if I didn't know.
Right.
And it took me, and I didn't know until after he died, and quite long after he died.
As someone who also had a promiscuous parent, since this has devolved into this, everybody knew, I didn't know everything because I was in so much denial, but a lot of people knew a lot of stuff.
Well, it's true that when I finally figured out that my father was gay, about 6 months after he died, I thought, oh, great. Now it's my job to tell people.
Right.
And mostly they knew.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Sorry, I don't know if that's better or worse. I think one of the most interesting things for me, and this is just my experience, was I had this thing in the book about my mom and how she had shared an apartment with this woman she was friends with. And I became friendly with the woman named Judy Licht, who I had in the book that my mom and her had an apartment together. And Judy took me aside. We were having a meal, and she said, "I'm so sorry to tell you this, but we never had an apartment together. It wasn't true." And I thought to myself, of course she didn't have an apartment with her. Judy was married and had a baby. And for me, it was like this amazing moment where I realized that so much of what I had believed of that time wasn't true, but that it was so hard for me to were I normal me, if someone told me a story that didn't track, which they do almost all the time since I cover American politics, I would have said, that sounds fishy. But with this story, I was like, of course she had an apartment with this person who was married to someone and had a baby. Why wouldn't she? And so I do think it's very hard to have clarity about one's parents.
Yeah. That's not a question.
That was sort of a question.
It's hard to have clarity about one's parents. Certainly, if we're going to go down this road of self-justification, which I love, certainly I had a parent who was very invested in me not knowing what he was really doing or who he really was. And it worked. I didn't know.
Yeah. But, how much should you know about your parents anyway? I feel like we knew more than we probably should have.
Maybe.
So I want to go.
We should talk about writing more.
Oh, okay. Let's
do. You want us to talk about writing more,
or do you want to go to audience questions? Oh. No, more writing. Audience questions. Right. Oh, writing. Okay, writing. All right. One more question about writing, and then we're going to audience questions.
She's tough.
Okay.
Okay. Here's what you do.
Go do it. How do you write?
You write your 10 pages. It doesn't matter how you do it. Just do it. And then, are you ready? Okay, you take a breath, you walk around the block, and then you write those 10 pages from memory, okay? From memory. You don't look at the previous thing. You don't tinker with it. You write them from memory. And you end up with about 3 lines, but they're the best 3 lines in the 10 pages. Okay, so that's one trick. Another trick is you read the whole thing, let's say it's 10 pages, and you find the paragraph with the most heat. Right? You read it and you can almost feel it coming off the page. And then you lead with that paragraph. And then you see where everything else falls into line. And then you can do that backwards. You find the paragraph with the most heat and you end with that paragraph. As you remember, I love this, John Irving starts every novel with the last line. He gets the last line. And then he spends a year not writing, but just letting the novel pile up in his head against the last line. So that's another method that you might want to try. Another thing you want to do for sure, absolutely don't turn anything in without having done this. You need to read it aloud and listen to it read aloud to you, and then you need to find an audience. I have what I call my victims, and they're people who know that I'm going to call them and read them something, and all they have to go is, right? You don't need much, but it's completely different. You know the rubber ducky trick? You know the rubber duck. So when you're talking to a rubber duck, go to Amazon, get a rubber duck. If you have a problem, tell the rubber duck about it. You will find that you think about it very differently. The rubber duck is not thinking about it, obviously, and you know that, so your mind is going to work differently. You're trying to figure out ways for your mind to work, to relate to your prose in a different way. Then you go through every sentence and you ask yourself, stop me when it gets bad.
Never stopping
and
you
you
now.
ask yourself, is this a simple sentence, a complex sentence, or a compound sentence, or a compound complex sentence? And if you don't know what those are, you go online and look them up. And it doesn't matter what you call them. You can call them Alfred and Tom, but you say, what kind of sentence is this? Is this the right kind of sentence for what I have to say or not? And those are just like 4 things or 5 things. You know, that's just the opening gambit. So if you want to write, that's how you do it. It's not rocket science, guys. You can do it. It's just a huge amount of work.
And with that, we're going to go to audience questions.
Yes.
That's good, because we've taught everyone how to write now, and I'm very excited. All right, so.
Okay, so I'm one of those people, growing up, I was born in the 40s, and I used to read all the time. And I'm a good writer, but not fiction. And I would love to write fiction, but I can't write dialogue. I can't write descriptions. I've tried it once or twice. So it's not that easy for other people.
Did I say it was easy?
Well, you described it as a discipline that one could learn, and some people just can't. I mean, I've gotten through life as a writer, but it's not politically correct, so I can't get published except for small stuff. But that's not my question. Is actually not about writing. It's about your brothers.
My brothers.
Yes. I mean, you obviously had this very close, very complicated relationship with your father. Did your brothers have the same thing? And were they writers too?
My brothers.
That's a good question.
It's a really good question. My younger, I'm the oldest, so my middle brother is also a writer, yes. And he's written quite a few books, many of them quite wonderful, actually.
Fiction, nonfiction?
He's written both. He wrote a wonderful novel called The Plagiarist, and he also wrote a wonderful book about running. He's a marathon runner. And he also wrote a book called, what was it called? Selling Ben Cheever, where he just went and took every job he could get. And so he was making sandwiches and he was selling cars. And so he's a very interesting writer. He's writing a book now about dogs. So that's my middle brother. And my younger brother became a lawyer.
That's writing. That's what I do.
And it's a kind of writing, certainly. And he was killed 7 years ago.
Oh.
Yeah. And I like to think he was about to start writing. But he didn't do it. So that's just my fantasy. But yeah, I think it's contagious in that way.
Or it runs in families.
Maybe.
All right, we need more questions here, or else I'll just talk. I think that I always think when my grandfather was Howard Fast and my father became a writer, and I always said, like, why? And he would say, I thought it was like the only way you could make money. I thought it was really like a viable career path. And I was like, really? And he said, yes. So some of us are just a little slow. I said, really? Questions? Yes.
It's not a question. It may not interest anyone. But you mentioned The Swimmer. And decades ago, I taught college writing. And The Swimmer was one of the short stories in the anthology. And I had always read it as a story about dying. And he's going from pool to pool across the county. And my students, every single one said, oh, no, this is a story about alcoholism. And I finally said to myself, I mean, I'm a little bit flexible. Well, gosh, maybe I'm wrong. Maybe it's about alcoholism. Could you comment? I mean, since you read the Uber and the original text. And
Well,
Did you read the novel too? The swimmer novel?
No. What's one?
With this novel that he wrote before he got to the 10 pages.
did you read the original before he cut it down?
Oh, no.
Oh, okay.
I just watched. No. So I think the answer is all of the above. A lot has been, I have a whole chapter about the swimmer in which I explore all the different, Olivia Lang, for instance, also thinks it's about alcoholism. She thinks it's about alcoholic, she's a British philosopher. She thinks it's about alcoholic blackouts. I gave a speech at one point to a group of psychoanalysts, and I was fascinated to see that their response to the swimmer was, how can we help this guy? Maybe if he was on Xanax. And I tried to explain to them that actually, we're all going to die. And they weren't interested in that information. So a lot of people, Roger Deakins started something called the Wild Swimming Movement from the swimmer. A lot of the swimmer has given rise to, I think because it's so compressed and so dense and powerful, it's given rise to a lot of different explanations and behaviors. And I don't know which one is right. I mean, I don't know if I don't know if I would say it's about death, although it's certainly about death. But it's about, well, I don't know. Are we going to call it death? Is that what we should call it?
It is an interesting story. But I do think phenomena when people, a group of people, students, admittedly 18, 19-year-olds, say, no, this is about alcoholism.
Interesting.
You have to stop and think.
Right. Yeah. Well, other people have thought that, and
Interesting.
certainly he was drinking, and I mean, the opening is alcoholic, right?
Yeah.
The opening is this group of people sitting around going, "I drank too much last night," so to think it's about alcohol is not that wild.
Yeah. Thank you.
We've answered all their questions.
Yes.
Oh
I
no.
have one question. You mentioned that your father had concealed very, very well his other activities. I was just wondering if after his death, some of the participants might have reached out to his family, and whether that would have provided a better knowledge of your father by seeing him through the eyes of people you didn't know him.
That's a really good question, and the answer is that did happen, but it happened while he was still alive. In other words, my father was very fond of graduate students, male graduate students of a certain kind, and he wanted to help them. He did, but he also wanted to do other things with them. And one of those graduate students became a close friend of mine. In fact, I thought he and I were in love, whereas in fact, got the wrong person. And he became like a brother almost, because he was in the house all the time, and so there were a lot of friendships that my father had that I only understood much later. But those people were great. One of them, the first book I wrote about my father in 44 years ago, one of those guys, Denny Coates, I wonder if he's still, helped me edit it. And he knew more, he knew a lot. So those people that my father brought into our family, I found enriched the family. Now, I often wondered what my mother thought as she cooked lunch for them. But she didn't tell me, and I didn't ask her because I didn't even know to ask.
It's so interesting because my mother had all these guys she was sleeping with, not to just make this about myself here, and I also adored them. Like, later I would find out that they were all the affairs of my mother, but I always just thought they were these great, interesting guys who were very father-like to me, and that were just sort of very interesting. And it turned out she was sleeping with all of them I guess, which is the end of that story.
Yeah,
A little
well,
disappointing, maybe.
I really liked my father's main squeeze. Oops.
Yes, we got very distracted here on our parents' promiscuity, but anyway, we're back. Leslie?
So the question really is, what about your mom? I'm just really curious. What was your relationship like with your mom? What do you think she knew and didn't know? And how did it shape you as a woman and a mother yourself? The relationship that you had with your mom.
Well, fortunately, my father, or fortunately, he left copious journals, which, and every day he kept his journals, and they've never been published. And I have them, of course. And so one of the rules I made for myself was that when I was writing about a story, I would look and see what he said about it when in the journals at the time he was writing the story. And it's pretty interesting because you can see him pick up a piece of gossip in the journals, and then he changes the names, and then he changes what happens slightly, and then so the journals are fascinating. And so I know some of what my mother felt, or I know some of what my father thought my mother felt. And I think she was conflicted. And I also think she did this thing. There's got to be a word for this, when you know and don't know something at the same time. What is that? I think she had that. And I think she, when they met, they really needed each other. My mother came from a very weird, distinguished family, and she was the pretty stupid one of 9 children. And so nobody took her seriously. And when she brought my father home, bang, they took her seriously. And it made a huge difference in her ability to get along with her own parents, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. My father had his own fish to fry, so to speak. He had just gotten out of the Army and didn't quite know what he was going to do. I think he obviously didn't know what he was going to do, and my mother solved his problem. He became Mr. Aristocratic suburban idiot. I wasn't very kind.
Wait,
she solved his problem. So I think they had an arrangement. I don't think anything was ever said, but there's one time in his journals where they go to see Cat on a Hot Tin Roof? No. They go to see Streetcar Named Desire. And as you remember in Streetcar Named Desire, Blanche has a previous love affair with a woman. And my mother was like, as they were walking home. And my father, in his journals, says something about what did she know and what did she... So they danced around it.
Are you going to publish the journals?
I want to publish the journals.
Yeah, you should publish the journals.
I should publish the journals.
Well,
okay.
I think Farrar Straus, those fancy...
When I found the journals and I read the journals, I took the journals to Knopf and sold the journals for a lot of money.
Oh.
Wait, stop. And we made a deal that they would publish the abridged book of the journals, and that then they would publish the entire journals, because I felt very strongly that the journals should be published, that they should be available. They are available. If you go to the Houghton Library at Harvard, you can read them there. All you have to do is show your driver's license. It's no big deal. But, of course, you have to go to Cambridge, blah, blah, blah. But Knopf promised they would publish the entire journals, and they never did. And I tried to get them to, and, they don't do what I say. So the journals are just sitting there.
At Knopf. Owned by Knopf.
No. We got them back.
Oh.
Yeah.
Publish them.
They published an excerpt, a very narrow excerpt, which ended up being the book, which is quite a slim little book. The journals themselves are in these huge banker's boxes in my closet.
This is a very cool story. So Susan's going to sign some books. And if you have questions, if you want to ask a question.
I would like to ask a question.
We have time for one more question.
Actually, could I ask you a question? Sure. You mentioned that one of your grandparents was Howard Fast. My only question, and please don't answer it if it's too personal, is do you feel having a very famous grandfather as one of your ancestors influenced what you chose to do with your life?
We've spent like 20 minutes talking about our parents' promiscuity, so this is very appropriate, I think, this question. No, I was very close with my grandfather, and I think that there was a feeling. He was very close with my mother, and so they definitely had this weird friendship, and there was a feeling that I was sort of in a weird and dysfunctional way, the product of both of them, and not my father, which is an essay that one might want to write someday. So yes, I definitely felt that. That's a very good question. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much for being willing to address that. That's. I hope I didn't embarrass anyone here by asking that one. I read Howard Fast's novels when I was growing up, and they made a very powerful impression on me. Well, I read some of them, and I wish I'd read more, and they made a very powerful impression on me.
All right, so Susan's going to sign books?
Yes. Copies of Susan's books are available at the checkout desk.